Hey there, and welcome back to another deep dive. It's our chance to really explore something fascinating, pulling out the key insights from the materials you've shared with us.
Yeah, exactly. Think of it as a shortcut to getting up to speed, maybe with some surprising facts thrown in.
And hopefully just enough humor to keep you hooked, right?
We try. Today,
Mhm.
we're kind of navigating into some of the internet's less visible spots.
Mm.
We know the web has layers, and, well, some parts are just for privacy, but the dark web,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately, that often provides cover for some pretty serious illicit activity.
And the materials you've given us this time offer a pretty compelling look into that hidden landscape. We've got details on major recent law enforcement actions,
Right, big takedowns.
and also a really interesting study focusing specifically on counterfeit goods traded on these dark markets. That one caught my eye.
Yeah, it's got some surprising stuff in it. So our mission today really is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from all this
We want to help you grasp the sheer scale of the problem, understand the specifics of what's being traded there, and see how authorities are trying to tackle it.
and how they're adapting their strategies too.
Exactly. Now, before we really jump in, this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
That's right. So if you're looking for secure, ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage.
You can contact sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo. Okay, let's get into it.
All right. So starting with the scale of the challenge
Sure.
and how law enforcement is pushing back, the materials really highlight a recent, pretty significant international operation, Operation RapTor.
Operation RapTor. Okay, sounds big. What were the key results from that one?
It was definitely a major undertaking, really massive coordination. Law enforcement across 4 continents, multiple countries. You've got the U.S., Germany, U.K., France, Austria, Netherlands, Brazil, Switzerland, Spain, South Korea.
Wow, truly global then.
Absolutely. And the scope was broad. They made 270 arrests globally. They weren't just going after low-level people either. They were targeting vendors, buyers, and even the administrators running these dark web markets.
And does an operation like that, does it build on previous intel, like from markets they've already shut down? How does that work?
Yes, exactly. That's often how it happens. These large operations leverage intelligence from prior takedowns. Markets like Nemesis, Tor2Door, Bohemia, Kingdom markets were mentioned. The data trails left behind give investigators crucial leads.
Leads about users, activity.
Right. And agencies like Europol's European Cybercrime Center or the U.S.'s J-Code team that's joint criminal opioid and darknet enforcement, they're vital for pulling together and sharing that intelligence across borders.
Makes sense. So beyond the arrests, what was the tangible impact? Seizures of goods, assets?
The numbers are pretty striking, actually. They seized over $200 million. That's in currency and digital assets like
Like
crypto.
100 million. Okay.
And in terms of physical stuff, over 2 metric tons of drugs were confiscated. And crucially, within that amount, they specifically identified 144 kilograms of fentanyl, or fentanyl-laced narcotics.
Wow. Targeting fentanyl specifically, that's obviously a huge priority given how dangerous it is.
It absolutely is. But the scope went even wider. They also seized over 180 firearms.
Firearms, too.
Yep, and 12,500 counterfeit items, plus over 4 tons of illegal tobacco. It really paints a picture of the sheer breadth of criminal commerce happening on these platforms.
It really does highlight why that kind of international cooperation is so critical, doesn't it? These networks just don't respect borders.
Not at all. And ultimately, this work has a direct impact that goes way beyond the digital world. These operations disrupt the flow of dangerous goods, deadly drugs, illegal weapons that can directly harm communities everywhere.
Okay, so that gives us the big picture on the law enforcement side, the takedowns. Now let's kind of shift gears. There's another part of the materials that really digs into something specific. Counterfeit goods on dark markets.
Ah, yes, that study. It offers a really valuable perspective, I think, because it's a different angle compared to just relying on, say, border seizure data.
How so? Different how?
Well, as the study points out, border checks, while important, are often incomplete. Only a tiny fraction of shipping containers actually get inspected, and methods vary. So seizure data can be skewed or just miss things.
Right, so looking at dark market listings gives us a window into what criminals are actively trying to sell, whether or not it gets caught later.
Precisely. It's about what's being offered. The study analyzed data from 11 different dark markets over 2014 and 2015, looking at vendor behavior and inventory.
Okay.
Now, counterfeits were actually a relatively small slice of the total listings on these markets. The study found about 2.69%. But you have to remember, the global trade in counterfeits is massive. It was valued at, what, $509 billion back in 2016.
Huge number.
So even a small percentage of listings on the dark web represents a significant chunk of that global problem.
So what was the most surprising thing in the breakdown? Like, what kinds of counterfeits were most common on these dark markets, especially compared to what usually gets seized at borders?
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Watches.
Mm.
By far, watches were the most dominant category in the dark market listings they looked at.
Watches? Really?
Yep, making up something like 59% of all the counterfeit listings analyzed.
Ah.
That's vastly higher than their usual share in border seizure data.
59%. Wow, that is surprising. I'd have guessed, I don't know, maybe clothing, electronics.
Well, those things were there too, sure.
Hmm.
But the study actually noted that categories like electronics, clothes, and tobacco were less prevalent on the dark markets compared to the seizure stats.
Less prevalent, huh?
Yeah. Other categories they saw included forgeries, handbags, sunglasses, but nothing came close to watches.
Why do you think that is? Why so many watches on dark markets compared to what gets caught physically crossing borders? Is there a theory?
That's a great question the data raises, isn't it? It could be down to the nature of the goods. Watches are high value but small, right? Easier to ship discreetly than, say, bulky electronics or literally tons of tobacco.
Makes sense, logistically?
It might also reflect vendor strategy. Maybe focusing on high-value, smaller items is just more profitable or less risky in that specific dark web environment. It definitely gives us a different snapshot of the preferred illicit inventory compared to bulk seizures.
Okay. And where were these fakes listed as coming from? Did that match the usual suspects?
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
China and Hong Kong were listed as the primary origins, which, broadly aligns with traditional seizure data. We kind of expect that.
Right.
But here's another interesting bit. The U.S. actually accounted for 5% of the dark market counterfeits in this study. Compare that to only about 0.4% in seized goods originating from the U.S.
Hold on, 5% from the U.S. in the listings. That's a significant jump compared to the seizure figures. What could that suggest?
It certainly suggests something different might be going on there. It could potentially point to maybe a higher volume of domestically produced counterfeits being traded within the U.S. using these markets.
Or just different trade patterns.
Exactly. Or perhaps a different type of trade flow that isn't captured as easily by monitoring incoming border shipments. It really highlights how this kind of dark market intelligence can reveal facets of the trade that traditional data might miss entirely.
Fascinating. Okay, let's talk price. You mentioned high value, but how cheap were these fakes compared to the genuine articles?
Significantly cheaper. Massively so, in some cases. The study estimated that genuine products on the regular surface web were, well, vastly more expensive. For watches, specifically, the estimate was they were around 147 times cheaper on the dark markets.
Whoa, 147 times cheaper. That is an enormous difference.
It really puts the potential profit margins into perspective, doesn't it?
Huh.
Even if you're selling them for pennies on the dollar compared to retail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And focusing on those high-value items like watches, maybe clothing, jewelry, as the study suggests vendors do,
Yeah.
even at those low prices, it can still yield significant profits.
And maybe points to who they're selling to?
Potentially, yeah. This pricing and the focus on items like watches could suggest they're tailoring their trade more towards individual end consumers rather than, say, large, bulk, business-to-business shipments, which might be more likely to show up in border seizures.
And I think the study also looked at estimated sales volumes, right? Based on feedback. Did that back up the watch finding?
It did, yes. The data crunched from vendor feedback seemed to point towards watches having the highest estimated sales volume, which aligns pretty well with them being the most listed item.
Okay, so let's look at the tech behind all this and that constant back and forth with law enforcement. Cryptocurrency is obviously key here.
Oh, absolutely central. Crypto is the main payment method on these dark markets. And, criminals are always trying ways to cover their traffic.
Like using privacy coins.
Exactly. Things like privacy coins, which are designed to make tracing transactions much harder, or bouncing funds between multiple digital wallets, trying to obscure the trail.
Which must present a huge challenge for investigators, right?
Yeah.
Tracing crypto isn't like following a simple paper trail or grabbing a bag of cash.
Precisely. It needs specialized training, specialized tools. The materials mention that evidence related to crypto, things like written down wallet addresses or those crucial seed phrase lists, which are basically the recovery keys.
The keys to the kingdom, almost.
Pretty much. That kind of evidence is found in a significant number of cases, around 33.6%, according to the data provided. It really underscores the growing need for investigators to have that specific crypto expertise.
And it really feels like a constant cat and mouse game, doesn't it? Law enforcement gets better at tracking or taking down markets.
And the criminals adapt their tactics. They absolutely do. One trend that was highlighted is a potential shift away from those big centralized marketplaces, which, become prime targets for operations like RapTor.
Makes sense. Too much heat.
Right. Moving towards smaller, maybe more dispersed operations, sometimes even just single vendor shops. It's a strategy to try and fly under the radar, basically. This is ongoing technological arms race, and it's fundamentally changing how crime is fought in this digital age.
So pulling all these threads together, what does this deeper insight, the kind we get from dark web analysis like that counterfeit study, what does it really mean for the bigger picture?
Well, I think it clearly shows that the intelligence you can gather from analyzing dark markets offers really unique insights. It complements the traditional law enforcement data we get from seizures and arrests.
It's not just what gets caught.
Exactly. It's about understanding what's being offered, the characteristics like listed origin or price points.
Yeah.
It helps build a much more complete picture of the whole illicit trade ecosystem.
And could this kind of intelligence actually help with prevention, proactive measures?
Absolutely. That's a key potential benefit. Companies, for example, could potentially use this data if they know specific products are popping up as fakes or listed as coming from certain unexpected places.
They could maybe tighten up their supply chain security.
Right. Strengthen their security, their guardianship efforts, focus resources where this dark web data suggests the risks are highest. It helps them see threats they might otherwise miss completely through just normal channels.
You could even imagine maybe spotting things like pre-release leaks of product designs if fakes suddenly appear on dark markets before the genuine item is even officially out.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility that was mentioned, using this kind of data as an early warning system. Of course, understanding all this also touches on that broader societal challenge we keep bumping up against.
The privacy versus security thing.
Yeah, that ongoing difficult debate about how we balance online privacy and anonymity with the very real need to effectively combat the illegal activities that unfortunately exploit that anonymity. It's a tough line to walk.
No easy answers there. Well, this deep dive into the materials has really pulled back the curtain on this complex world of dark web crime, hasn't it?
It really has.
We've seen the scale of these huge international takedowns, seizing millions, tons of illicit goods, but then also drilling down into those fascinating, surprising details from the counterfeit study, like the sheer dominance of fake watches, that unexpected U.S. origin data.
It really shows how dynamic this hidden digital landscape is and why strategies constantly need to evolve on both sides.
Absolutely. And I guess it leaves you, the listener, with something to chew on. Given these specific insights, especially about the dark web counterfeit trade, the types of goods, the origins, the prices, how can we actually translate that knowledge into more effective, maybe more proactive strategies?
Yeah, how can consumers and businesses better spot fakes or secure their supply chains in a world where these illicit goods are moving between hidden online spaces and potentially right out into plain sight?
It's a critical question for everyone to think about, really.
Definitely food for thought.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, just one final reminder that this exploration was brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
Remember, if you need secure, ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly offers air-gapped and immutable solutions.
You can reach out to sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been interesting.
It really has. We appreciate you listening.